Hello, I'm Dr. Shannon Farrell, and I'm the leader of the project entitled Mental Health Issues for Farmers, Their Families, and Their Communities. And while that may be a long title, our goal is simple. We just want to provide you with the resources that you need to improve your mental well-being. This project wouldn't have been possible without funding provided by USDA NEFA through the Southern Risk Management Education Center, and we're very grateful for their support. It's no secret that farming is stressful, and recent events have only increased that level of stress. In today's presentation, Mr. Jordan Shuler dives into that stress and what we can actually do to manage it. Today, Mr. Shuler will talk about the sources of stress on the farm, what influences our responses to those stresses, how we can manage stress in a positive way, and how we can all tap into our communities of support. Along with this presentation is a very quick survey to complete after you've watched, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback on that survey. Additionally, you'll find a link to the project website with many more resources that you might find useful. We appreciate your time in watching and joining us today.
My name is Jordan Shuler. I'm a master's student in the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Oklahoma State University, and I worked on this presentation with Dr. Matt Brosey, who is a state specialist with the OSU Cooperative Extension Service. And I'm grateful to have a chance to talk a little bit today about managing farm stress. To get started, let me just give an introduction to what I mean when I talk about stress with a simple definition. Stress is the feeling of being under too much mental or emotional pressure. And pressure turns into stress when you feel unable to cope. That second part of the definition, turning into stress when you feel unable to cope, will be what I spend a lot of time on today. But before I get too much into that, let me also talk about how stress reactions differ from person to person. A situation that feels really overwhelming to one person may feel totally fine and manageable to somebody else, and there can be a lot of factors that play into that. I'll focus on a few of them today, but just imagine if you're somebody that works in an office versus somebody that works on a farm, the hailstorm that comes through an area will have very different reactions. If you work in an office, it may be mildly bothering and slightly annoying, whereas if you work on a farm, it could be really worrying if a bad hailstorm comes through your area. And for farmers, stress is a regular part of day-to-day life. I grew up on a farm family and remember hearing stories about long days and then short nights with repeating over and over again difficult situations. And I will also say that for farmers, it's so regular that they've developed a lot of resilience over the years to manage stress. And hopefully we'll be able to add a couple of new tools to the ways that you already work to manage your stress. Let me talk a little bit about what influences the degree of stress we experience. So, the amount of stress that we feel starts with pressure. And there's lots of things that add pressure to our lives. All sorts of different situations, events, and roles that we fill that create pressure or a need for us to adapt to them. This can be anything from equipment failures, weather conditions, even things that happen at home or with our family. Any of these types of things can add pressure to our lives, and that directly plays into how much stress we experience. But there are other things that sort of come between the pressure and the amount of stress we experience. And the first of these are the resources that we have available to use when the pressure starts to mount. And resources can include how we talk with our families, use community resources, or even things like the amount of money or other resources we have available when things are getting tense. Additionally, our perception of the source of pressure influences how much stress we experience. Again, going to my earlier example, if you work in an office, a hailstorm probably doesn't seem that threatening to your livelihood. Whereas if you work on a farm, it could seem like it could do some damage to your well-being or the amount of money you'll make in the upcoming seasons. And that can influence how much stress you experience. Now, let me dig into a little bit about what happens to us when the stress we experience goes from a manageable level into higher levels of stress and even into areas of crisis when we get really overwhelmed. At a basic level, stress suppresses our immune system. That means that when we feel really overwhelmed, we not only get sick easier, but it's also harder for us to get feeling better and to kind of bring ourselves back to our normal level of productivity. And there are numerous other emotional and physical disorders linked to stress. Sleep disturbances have a lot to do with this. You can imagine a cycle starting where you start to experience more pressure, the stress mounts, and then you have a difficult time falling asleep or staying asleep. As that happens, your normal abilities to cope start to get frayed, you get a little bit more tense, and things start seeming more threatening, and that can build extra stress and again influence sleep in a circular way that can add more and more pressure. Additionally, you might experience diminished capacity for logical thought when you're experiencing a lot of stress. Now, on a farm, when accidents can be dangerous and you may need to be able to think on your feet quickly and in a clear way, that kind of stress overload can, in fact, make things more dangerous for you on a day-to-day basis. And finally, there are a bunch of other things that have been linked to stress in research. These include depression, anxiety, stroke, heart attack, hypertension, digestive disturbances, contracting different viruses ranging from the common cold to AIDS, as well as skin conditions being more likely. To say it again more simply, a lot of stress can be really harmful to your health and your emotional and physical well-being. Now, as I said earlier, stress starts with the pressure we experience. So let me talk a little bit about the things that can add pressure to your lives in our state. To start, let me talk a little bit about financial stress and poverty. In 2019, almost 16% of Oklahomans were living in poverty, which means roughly making less than $25,500 a year for a family of four. And right now, that situation could be even harder with COVID-19 affecting the employment of tens of thousands of Oklahomans. Also, more than 1 in 3 people in Oklahoma qualify as obese. Furthermore, we rank second in the nation for substance abuse problems and third in the nation for divorce rates. Additionally, Oklahoma experiences higher than average tornado rates and drought conditions. Now you can imagine, again, some of these not only create pressure in the first place, like natural disasters or the financial stress, but sometimes factors such as obesity and substance use are made worse by the stress we experience and the ways that we try and cope with those, and again can create a circle of pressure and stress that can be hard to break out of. Now let me dig in a little bit more specifically to the situation for farmers. Farming is considered to be one of the most stressful and dangerous occupations out there. And there's a lot of things that play into that, and I'm just going to cover a few today. First of all, farming can be a very dangerous occupation. Many farming families have experienced the tragedy of a family member experiencing a debilitating injury or even death as they go through their normal work on the farm. And in fact, tractor-related accidents have accounted for up to a third of all farm-related deaths. Sometimes there's technology or means available that can make things like tractors or other aspects of farming work safer, but the loss or decrease of income can make it difficult to afford these types of improvements even when they are available. And this has been a particularly tough time recently for farmers in terms of finances. In fact, some have compared the situation now to the farm crisis of the 80s. Furthermore, a lot of families on farms experience foreclosures, and this can be not only devastating as a loss of your home, but it also can be the loss of something that's been in the family for generations, adding extra layers of pressure and stress to your life. Furthermore, the drought and natural disasters that we have so little control over can have so much of an impact on your livelihood when you rely on weather conditions to some degree for your income. And finally, pressure mounting can make relationships more difficult, leading to high divorce rates on farms. And of course, the disease we talked about earlier becomes more likely as you experience high amounts of pressure and stress. These are so common that they've actually been given a term called the 5 Ds of farm loss. These are death, divorce, disease, disaster, and disability. Any one of these happening can be difficult enough, but as they happen in sets, it can increase the pressure in our lives so much that we have a difficult time coping and may experience a crisis. Also, talking about the current situation, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the difficulties many people are experiencing with COVID-19. In some ways, rural communities may seem like they're better off in the face of the coronavirus, being as they're more spread out and maybe have lower transmission rates. However, rural communities tend to be both older and have higher levels of long-term health problems, both of which can lead to health complications relating to coronavirus. Furthermore, the hospital systems in rural areas may already be strained, making it so that influx of patients due to COVID-19 can be particularly dangerous. It may not be surprising that with the difficult conditions and pressure farmers experience, that when crises hit like death, divorce, or disability, it can sometimes push farmers beyond stress into a crisis, and that is part of why we see higher suicide rates among farmers and in rural communities. Depression and suicide on the farm are unfortunately more common than you find in urban areas. And this has to do with some of the factors we've talked about earlier, including loss of income and increased debt, health and family problems, and a high access to potentially lethal means. There are a few acute crisis and warning signs to look out for if you have loved ones you're concerned may be pushed beyond their normal ability to cope. The first of these include thoughts about suicide. One of the first warning signs of somebody in a crisis will be they may talk more often about death, or they'll talk more about thinking about killing themselves. Secondly, you can look out for specific plans. Somebody that's in a crisis and considering suicide is at a greater risk if they start talking about how they would carry out suicide. And finally, having access to lethal means such as medication or firearms can be a final risk factor to be careful to look out for. So if a loved one that you know or a member of a community has been talking about and thinking about killing themselves and have talked about a specific plan, and you know that they have access to lethal means, it may be literally life-saving to simply say something like, hey, would you mind if I take the medications until we find a way for you to get some help? Or would you mind if I take the key to your gun cabinet just until you find a way to get some help and get to a better place? Now let me go back to kind of where I started and put this all together. I've talked a lot about the stress that farmers experience and the stress and pressure in Oklahoma. Let me recap by simply saying that high levels of stress increases both health challenges and emotional challenges. And stress begins with pressure, or the pressuring situations and events that we experience. And there's a bunch of these that we've talked about. Regular day-to-day farm life carries lots of pressure. Additionally, COVID-19 and conditions generally in Oklahoma can add pressure into an already difficult day-to-day working life on the farm. And finally, with all these things happening, any one of the 5 Ds of farm loss can push your ability to cope past your normal levels and have you experience high levels of stress or even crisis. So what do we do with this information? As I talked about at the beginning, there are a few things that can really impact how much stress we experience as pressure mounts. The first of these are the resources that we have available. Now, a lot of us, when we hear the word resources, you might think about income or available monetary resources. Those certainly can affect how much stress you experience. Having equipment failure when you have plenty in savings can be a lot less stressful than if money is really tight and you have a critical piece of equipment fail. But I also want to make sure we talk about social resources that we have available to us. In fact, I'll dig into this a little bit more later because I think it's such an important concept. The other thing that can really impact how much stress we experience is our perception of the events that create pressure for us. If we see something as threatening, it's more likely to feel stressful for us. Or when we look at stress in difficult circumstances as a chance for us to grow resilience or to gain greater skills, that type of perception can decrease the amount of stress we experience as we think of things in a different light. Now, this all comes back to what do we actually do to decrease the stress in our lives? Based off of what I've talked about, there are basically three areas that we can use to decrease our stress. And the first of these is to try and find ways to lessen the pressure in our lives. Maybe there's a project you can put on hold for now, or something that for the time being you can cut out of your life to decrease the pressure. However, a lot of farmers will tell you that that just isn't feasible. There isn't really a way to decrease the amount of pressure that they experience, and a lot of things might be out of their control in that sense. So the other thing to do is to increase your use of resources, especially social resources, and to see if there's a way that you can look at the pressuring situations in a new light or consider them chances for growth. Governor Brad Henry once said, "Resilience is woven deeply into the fabric of Oklahoma. Throw us an obstacle and we become stronger." That kind of mindset of resilience and remembering that you've gone through difficult times before and will have got through them in the past can help you can help the pressuring situations feel less threatening. So as we can cut back the pressure in our lives and use our social resources more and work a little bit on how we perceive difficult circumstances, it can lower our overall level of stress. Now let me return just briefly as I start getting ready to close up today to talk a little bit more about using social resources. A little while back, the Oklahoma Farm Bureau put out a story about a group of farmers who used their community to support them in difficult times. The story goes, a group of farmers got together originally to talk about business and innovative ideas to increase their income or to use their resources differently. And what started as basically business meetings at a local diner turned into chances to share regular stories of their hardships as well as good times on the farm. And these farmers found that as they shared their stories, they felt some of the pressure in their life lifting. They felt like they had the support they needed and the understanding from folks who really understood their situation. And that experience helped them lower the level of stress they experienced and find new ways to thrive in their day-to-day life on the farm. And I think that this story illustrates at least 3 principles that hopefully we can use to increase our use of social resources. The first of these is find a group of people who can really get you and who can hear your stories of pressure. There are certainly lots of things that farmers have in common, and there's lots of difficulties that we share, but your story is unique. And you may find that as you have a community that you can talk to, that your sharing of those difficulties of your life can help ease some of the pressure you experience. Secondly, they found a way to turn this into a routine. They would get together regularly at a local diner to talk about these things over breakfast. And that regular use and that routine turned what could be a one-time experience into a regular way to build their social support. Now, right now, as people are practicing social distance guidelines, that may seem like it's difficult, and indeed it can be harder than maybe in other times to find a community of support and use it. However, using things like using video conferencing calls or other things like that, you may yet be able to find ways to increase your social support. And finally, this group of farmers found that they shared a lot of values. Finding people that share your values of faith or your values of community and having chances to talk with them can make a huge difference in the amount of stress you experience. And that brings me to the end today. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope that as I've talked today, you've had 1 or 2 ideas about something that you can implement that can help you feel less pressure in your life and better be able to manage the pressure that you experience.